This webinar is probably one of the most important webinars you can ever watch in terms of how you can save your career and how you can actually get more opportunities in your career as well. It's one of the topics that so many attorneys, the majority of attorneys, don't follow. It can increase your income. It can increase your possibility of being a partner in a firm. It can increase right when you move, being a partner, if you're an associate or, wherever you are, it can increase your odds of getting a position. If you are a in-house, which is very difficult for people to get jobs, it can increase your odds of getting a position if you're in the government. It can increase your odds of getting a position dramatically if you're an LLM, meaning you're LLM for an LLM. It can increase your odds dramatically if you're in a niche practice area where there's not enough jobs in your market. It can increase your odds of getting a position if you're in a large market where there's more attorneys than you. And then there are jobs. That's a case for a lot of people. It can increase your odds of getting a position if you're in a market where there's a recession in your market. So, for example, corporate attorneys during recessions have incredibly difficult times getting jobs in major markets, which would be like New York, Palo Alto, Chicago, places like that. It can increase your odds of getting a position if you're unemployed. This honestly is probably the biggest way that you can get jobs and that people don't understand. So I'm going to walk through all the reasons today. I'm going to talk to you in a lot of detail about this because even though you think you may understand what I'm talking about just right now, you're going to understand this in a lot more depth. It's going to increase your marketability dramatically. It's going to change your life if you're in a position where you feel like you're unemployed or you're unemployed. So this particular topic is something that I have gotten multiple attorneys jobs doing. More than 50% of the people that I place, meaning I take people on that are having a difficult time in their market. A lot of people that I take on don't get interviews because they're looking in markets where there's just too many attorneys like them, or there's not enough people or not enough jobs in their practice area. This particular topic really can just make a major difference in your life and your career. So this, again, is a very important topic, and I'm excited to present it to you today. So it's much easier to find a job as an attorney in other markets where you may not be looking. A lot of attorneys think that they have reasons for being that they're resistant to looking in other markets. It's just a huge mistake that attorneys that I work with and attorneys that I see making every day, literally every day. And the most successful attorneys are the ones who search for jobs in many markets. So what does that mean? That means that there are a minimum of 250 cities you could be looking at. If you look at Wikipedia and you search for the 250 largest, markets in the country, there are over 250 markets you could work in. And again, more than half the placements that I make are attorneys who relocate from one market to another. Why is that? Because it's just much easier. When you look at other markets, there's not enough attorneys like you. So you may be working in in a smaller market where there's not enough attorneys like you. You may be working in a market where there's too many attorneys like you. And, regardless of your situation, I make these placements because, it's often, easier for attorneys, to relocate from a market where they currently are to another market. So I'm going to discuss the reasons why later in this webinar. We'll also take questions at the end. So I would encourage you to stay for the questions because, I'll answer questions related to this or anything you have related to your career. Just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Any questions related to your career, and then I'll talk about, the fact that there's just hundreds of cities. If you're interested, if you work in one of these 250 cities, you're going to exponentially increase your odds of getting a position. And this job search strategy works. It works. It's a wonder. I mean, it dramatically will change your career and the direction of your career and your life. And also, even in large cities, there's markets that are close by outside of those large cities. There was a huge recession in the legal market in the Chicago market for corporate attorneys in like 2008 and for other practice areas. The most remarkable thing happened. I took a lot of these corporate attorneys and we had a very good recruiter very good recruiters in our Chicago office. They just sent people to the suburbs, and the suburbs had work because they were working on smaller clients that weren't as resistant to, the market slowdown because they larger clients typically were having a major slowdown, whereas smaller clients just kept going with the corporate work for smaller companies. So this job set strategy works. It works where whatever market that you're in, it'll work in the suburbs, it'll work in other cities. And if are limiting your search to one market, you're just severely hampering your career. So you may be unemployed, underemployed, underappreciated in your market. A lot of times attorneys may not have gone to top law schools. And so there's a demand for people from top law schools in the largest markets. They can hire those people, so they don't hire people from less prestigious law schools or people that didn't do well or people they only hire from the largest firms. So you should be looking at other markets because it's going to change your career. It's going to give you the kind of work you want. It's going to give you the kind of advancement you want. Not looking at other markets is literally one of the worst career mistakes that you can make. People just try to stay in these larger markets for a variety of reasons. They think that they should be working in New York. They think that they become contract attorneys because they can't get jobs. It's absolutely insane. And they stay unemployed where they're not generating an income for their family. It's where they're not advancing a lot. They're not making money, where they're not advancing. It's just absolutely crazy. So, are people stubborn for doing this? They're absolutely stubborn. Do they throw away good careers when they try to stay in a certain market? Absolutely. Do I see this all the time on a daily basis? Absolutely. Does their career suffer indefinitely for doing so? Absolutely. There's all these other professions like doctors. It's a very prestigious profession. They go where the work is. They get residencies. They don't when they get a residency, they're looking all over the country and they're placed in a city. They could be placed in, Tulsa, Oklahoma. They don't know. And they might be going to law school and doing an internship in Los Angeles, but they'll take the job because that's where their place when they get a residency. So it's, people that confine their searches to one markets can't be helped a lot of times. And I can't often break through to these people. I mean, they just don't think about this. And again, there's hundreds of US cities where you can work in your practice here, regardless of what your practice is. It could be tax, it could be, corporate, I don't know, patent work. It could, regardless. And so, trying to talk to these people many times is like no different than, me sitting down with a squirrel and talking to the rule against perpetuities. They just don't listen. I mean, they can't understand this. And so the best way I can really make this point to you is to talk to you about this webinar, because I guarantee you're not looking at 250 cities in your search. I mean, there's some cities you can't go to. You can't work in Florida if you don't have the bar. That's very difficult, but you can get jobs there if you don't have the bar. You can do the same thing in California. So this webinar, you may just not listen. You may have already made up your mind, but I'm going to tell you the reasons why you can't. And attorneys are trained in law school to understand logic, meaning they're trained to get, and this is what the LSCT tests. It tests you to go through and make logical conclusions. And people don't make this with cities. So you're able to go to law school and pass law school by understanding logic and learning how to write and identify logical arguments. The same thing goes with the bar exam. That tests you. You have to be very good at to pass the bar. A lot of people don't pass the bar. In California, you're talking about people that pass the bar, well below 50%, and then they take it again, and it's less than 20% of the people that are retaking it. So people pass the bar, and in California, and they learn how to, do that, and then they say, "Oh, I'm only going to work in Los Angeles or San Francisco, where there's a lot of people." It's freaking crazy. And so they understand this logic of the passing the bar, but they're like the attorney trying to talk to a squirrel about the, rule against perpetuities. They just become a completely different person, like, and don't listen to logic when we're talking about relocating. And there are attorneys, you may be one of them, sitting around doing nothing or working in a job that you don't want. Maybe you don't like personal injury, or maybe you don't like personal defense and you want to do commercial litigation, but you're not doing it because, and working on more important work because you think that you have to be in these larger markets. And you may think it represents something to you, like I'm a big deal, or I'm working in this cosmopolitan city, San Francisco, or maybe you're working in a smaller market, like, and because you have family or friends there, you're not looking at mid-sized markets, or you're not even looking at large markets where you could get a job maybe. And because you have family or friends, or maybe you have a significant other there, and you believe you need to stay close by. If you have a significant other, I'll tell you, there are men and there are women that you can date and start a relationship with in every U.S. city. It's not hard, and maybe your significant other will move there because your career is very important. You went to law school and passed the bar, or you haven't passed the bar yet, and you're a law student. I mean, sometimes you may have a home that you purchase that you can rent out, or maybe your kids are in school, but their parent isn't making enough money or unhappy in that market. I spoke with an attorney in Colorado the other day. He worked in a major New York law firm. He relocated to Colorado, lost his Colorado job, had been out of work for 6 months, was running out of, savings, but wanted to stay there because he had a nice view in his house and he liked the air. Regardless, I mean, he went to an Ivy League school. He was currently making over $300,000 a year because and now he decided that he was going to stay in this market. So he's unemployed now, and he's been unemployed for 6 months, and larger firms are no longer interested in them because he's been unemployed for so long, and they think that there's something, maybe he got fired even though he didn't. And so he's enjoying the Colorado air and wanted to stay there because he likes the air. I will tell you that the air quality in the city you're living in is not as important as saving your career. I mean, this thing that I'm talking about with you today is just insane. And these are the reasons that people throw away careers, because they don't think about this. And you have to think about this. You have to do whatever you can to have the best career possible, to save your career, to get the jobs in the practice area that you want, to make as much money as possible, to keep your career on track, to get your career back on track. You have to do these things. And so this is what I'm going to talk about right now. So here's how smart attorneys stay employed and in demand. When an airplane takes off, I like this example, it knows exactly where it's going. If an airplane took off and wandered all over the sky without a clear objective, they would never arrive anywhere and they would end up in strange places. I know how to fly planes. As a matter of fact, when I learned to fly planes, I'm so old that there wasn't even GPS in planes. So what would happen is the airplane would take off, you would fly towards a beacon. A beacon would give out this beep, and that would be the direction you would want to go. And there weren't beacons everywhere. You had to fly towards one. And then as that signal got closer and closer and closer, and you got over that beacon, then you would know where you are, and then you would steer towards another beacon. So if you fly, I used to fly from Palo Alto to a city called El Monte, which is where the plane that I used was. And I would have to fly towards multiple beacons to get where I was going. Now you have GPS, and the GPS will help you make multiple, changes and, while you're flying. And now the GPS will even fly your plane for you. I mean, but you have to do multiple, you're making hundreds of, not thousands of adjustments when you're flying somewhere because you know where you're going. And, so before I get into these reasons, I just want to be clear. You've been an attorney. You've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on your education in college and then law school. You've made sacrifices, not only in regard to money, but years in college and law school. You've spent all this time studying, probably not working, and then you've spent time hopefully learning skills inside a law firm or other employer. You've done something that not everyone, the majority, the substantial majority, almost every college student that goes to is not capable of doing. And so you've done that. So presumably taking all this time to go to law school and taking all this time to do well in college and taking all this time to study for the LSATs and taking all this time studying for the bar, presumably this is something that's important to you. So let me just be very clear about your goals. Your personal goals may involve working in some market. It may involve that, but that's not the right goal. Your top objective needs to be to keep working or to get a job or to make the most of your skills by putting them to highest and the best use. So people get LLMs all the time, foreign attorneys, and they think that most of the time, they only apply to firms in a big city like New York City or Los Angeles, and they think that that's the only place they could get jobs. So almost every LLM that comes to the US and spends money, 100 plus thousand in an LLM program, thinks that, hey, I can only work in these large markets. They don't get jobs and they go home. Or, people do all these dumb things. They go to whatever law school, they think they need to work in a large city or whatever city they're in. They can't get jobs. They become contract attorneys and never work as real attorneys because they want to do that and they stay unemployed and not feeling like they're the best attorneys, or they are doing important work, or they go in the government and can't get a job when they come out in Washington D.C., which is happening right now, and all these people are being laid off because of Doge. I mean, so you need, in Washington D.C. is a very competitive market. There's far more attorneys than there are jobs in law firms. So people can work, can't get jobs in law firms, and then they sit there underemployed or not working. So, your goal needs to be to find people who are willing to pay for your skills. That means you need to be mobile and look at wherever you possibly can to find people that pay for these skills. There are places that are going to value your skills more than other places, and you need to go where those skills are valued, even if this means another market. I have attorneys that have been unemployed for 6 months, and suddenly they decide they are going to look and take my advice and look at smaller markets, and suddenly they're getting, 5 interviews or 10 interviews, and they weren't getting those before, and now they're having people compete for them, and they're getting multiple offers when this particular thing that they never would have thought it could happen before. I've seen attorneys in law schools that would be ranked in the bottom half, in the bottom quarter or bottom 20% of the law school rankings, and never could get jobs, and then they looked at other markets in their practice areas, and they're suddenly getting jobs. So if you're not employed, just going to be clear for you also, people that are unemployed have a more difficult time getting a new position. So when you're looking for a job, you want to try to relocate as quickly as possible and get a job, because the longer you're unemployed, the more difficult it is to get a job, even in smaller markets. I mean, it makes it easier, but you need to be employed as long as you can, not have breaks in your resume. And so if you are unemployed and not looking at smaller markets, it's going to be harder to get jobs in smaller markets too, because firms will think there's something uncertain. Maybe they think that you were fired, or maybe they think you can't get along with your peers, or maybe they think you have entitlement issues. And, so if you're in that position where you're not employed, that's not going to help you. If you're in danger of losing your job, sometimes people are in a firm and they are getting bad vibes. Like their work is being criticized too much, and or they're not doing the kind of work that they're not, whatever, or the firm's having financial problems, and so they know that there's not enough work. And so you need to, if you're in trouble wherever you are, and by the way, most attorneys get fired at least once during their careers, even some very, very good attorneys that end up becoming the most successful attorneys in the country in terms of their income and their prestige level get fired. And then they learn from that, and whatever reason they were fired, they go all out, a lot of them, and they do the best they can to find jobs. So, if you're in a job search, your number one goal and an incredibly important goal for you needs to find a position. So, you may think you want to remain where you are, and you think that's important. Let me tell you something. The rock stars and all over the people that the people admire and go to shows and they pack shows. If they're in Cleveland, they don't sit around in Cleveland, Ohio. playing every night or every other night and expect to make a living. They go all over the country. You look at the back of a tour t-shirt where they print it and they'll print, 40, 50 cities sometimes because they're going where people are paying for their talent. Think about that. If you're, whatever the rock band is or whatever the, singer or entertainer is, they're going all over the country. They're not staying in Cleveland or Detroit or Nashville. They're going all over the country to find positions. They're not seeing their families for extended periods of time. They're living out of buses and hotels. Sometimes they even write songs about it. I've heard songs by Elton John and other people talking about being on the road and missing, or Guns N' Roses. I heard one the other day, being on the road and missing their families. And so, you need to at least give yourself that opportunity. And everybody is going where the work is, and you're absolutely no different. So here are some personal reasons that you may be staying in the market you're in, that drastically outweigh the importance of your getting a job. So you may think that being near your brothers, sisters, and parents is important. Okay. But unless these people are going to pay you 100,000, 200,000, or 300,000 or more per year to sit around doing nothing and protect your legal career, I'm really not sure what the problem is. You can talk to them on the phone, you can FaceTime them. You're probably doing at least talking to them. You can text them, but they're not the people that went to law school. They didn't go to law school, and they're not, their careers aren't on the line. The work they're doing is not on the line. So I like my family, but my family, I'm not moving to where they are. I'm not moving to Palm Springs where my father is. I'm not moving to Rochester, New York, where my mother and sister are. I'm spending my waking time where I want to work. And this is what you should do. So these people don't understand, that if you're unemployed, your career is in danger of imploding if you don't get a job. So that's not your responsibility. I'm sorry, but it's just not. So you have to be able to get a job, and your family's not going to help you. You may think being near your civic and significant other is important to you, and you need to stay close to him or her. Now that it is obviously important to be close to your significant other. I am sympathetic to that. I've certainly, tried to be close to a significant other. If I've been dating someone for 6 months or a year and want to get engaged, or I am engaged, I would, want to be close to them. But, I hate to be harsh with you, but again, these people that you may feel like you're close to of the same sex or opposite sex, whatever, are not attorneys, and they're not in your situation. If they want to be married to an attorney, they're going to need to understand what they're getting themselves into, because you need to go where the work is, and that is that. And if they don't understand what being with you means, then maybe they're going to be better off with someone else, because you have to protect your career. You have to do whatever you need to do. And if a doctor is engaged to someone, that person always moves. So what's different? I mean, almost all the time. So what's different to you? So if you have a significant other, they're going to be happy and benefit from your for financial contribution. They're going to benefit from your status as an attorney. Let me tell you something that's kind of funny. So if you're in New York City, no one really cares if you're an attorney. It's just kind of like whatever, that it's not that big of a deal. You move into a smaller market, everybody's talking about how you're an attorney and thinking you're a big deal. Your neighbors are, the people you meet in the grocery store, everybody's impressed with that, but they're not impressed in the big markets. It's just how it works. So you move to a smaller market, your significant other is going to feel important that they're with an attorney, and they're going to need, maybe they want to move, but if they aren't willing to move, you're going to find someone else, because regardless of the market you're in, there's going to be a hell of a lot of attorneys, almost people your age, that will be interested in you. And frankly, in the smaller markets, there's going to be more people interested in you than the smaller market, than the larger market. So if this person's not interested in you because you're moving, then you're going to have to think about that relationship and move on, because there are plenty of people that you can meet. And again, that may sound harsh, but whoever your significant other is, they're not protecting your career. They're not making sure you're employed. They're not making sure you get the best work possible. They're not making sure you're not working as a contract attorney. they're not making sure that your only job you can get is working in-house or whatever, or with the government. They're not helping you with that. So maybe they're not the best person for you. I'm sorry, but if someone's not helping you and doesn't take your career seriously, then that's probably not a good thing. And that's just what it is. And so I'm sorry. In most cases, that significant other you're with is not working as an important of a job or as important of a career. The odds are very, very good. So, I'm sorry, but you have to protect your career. Sometimes people think being close to their friends is important. I like friends too. You can call them, you can FaceTime with them, you can instant message them for anywhere in the world, which is what you probably do now. You can take a trip with them. You may do that now. You can do whatever. But unless your friends are willing to pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to hang out with them a few nights a week and give you something to do all day for your career, you better re-examine your priorities. I mean, you can make friends easy anywhere. It's very easy if they're interesting people all over. When I clerked for a federal judge, I moved to a small lumber town that was very depressed, that wasn't there frankly weren't a lot of attorneys. All my neighbors and people I met were extremely impressed that I was an attorney. But I quickly made friends with a lot of people that were my age. These people, most of them all went to the same high school. Most of them never went to college, but I liked these friends a lot. I was a few of my friends had already been married a few times before the age of 25 and had kids. And one worked at Hooters and another was a clerk at the Department of Motor Vehicles and got fired for drinking on the job in the morning. But I had the time of my life with these people. And it was some of the, funnest time it was with my life being friends with these people. So, you can make friends anywhere. Sometimes people think that being in the town they grew up is a big deal, so they think they want to be around familiar people and places and things. They feel a connection, excuse me, to that market. So again, but none of these things are going to pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and they're just not. So, none of these things that are important to you, this market had to endure this education, testing, student loans, you'll live probably, most people now will live to the early 90s, maybe even later. And I know several attorneys that literally are in their mid 80s and still practicing. A lot of them you can practice. If you're 25, you can practice for the next 55 years. If you're 30, you can easily practice for the next 50 years. So if you're 60, you can practice for the next 20 years. And so, I know lots of attorneys that are now in their mid 80s and still practicing. So, if you think you don't have time to get familiar with other surroundings, whoever you are, whatever level you are, it's certainly possible. I grew up in a town of about 6,000 people in the Midwest, and by the time I was 18, I knew all the shopkeepers and things because I'd spent all this time, going to stores and things. I knew, all the history of everyone close to my age that, I knew. I knew their brothers and sisters, a lot of them. And most of these people actually never left. But I was very excited to get the hell out of there. I knew I'd get a better job. And, you may be different, but you need to go where the work is. And if your career is important to you, you need to go where the work is. Absolutely. Maybe your children go to school in the city and you need to stay there. You think you need to stay there. I love my children too, but all these my three girls are going to need someone to pay for their college education. They're going to need someone to pay for their weddings and all this stuff. So I need to work daily to make sure I can pay for that. And each week my girls need money for dance lessons, acting lessons, clothes, candy, school lunches, summer camp, toys. And as a parent, you probably have these various responsibilities too. So if you don't pay for this and you don't have a career, I'm really not sure best career. I'm not really sure where that leaves you. I mean, you have to be able to pay for those things. And when I grew up, I moved several times and I liked it. I ended up back in the town of 6,000. But again, maybe, you want the respect of your children. You want the respect that you have a good career. And that's very important. It's probably more important than staying in the market you're in. I relocated to markets because of my father's job. So whatever market you're relocating to, your kids are going to meet new people, and it's your responsibility to look after them and support them by looking out for your career. You may be in major markets. People are in Portland or New York or San Francisco or LA. And, I like Portland. I even like the rain. I love the crowds in New York and all the people there. I like the cool little houses that are expensive and hills and stuff in San Francisco. I actually don't even mind the traffic in Los Angeles. And, all these things I like, but, I certainly, would be more willing to give any of these up if it meant I could continue my career and make the best of use of my skills. I mean, I would. And there's absolutely no reason that anyone should remain in a market because it's close, tied to their identity. People think I'm a New York attorney, that's where I am, or I'm an LA type of person. That's part of their identity. But, the city you're in is not a person. It's not you. It didn't invest in your legal education. If it doesn't support you financially, it doesn't offer you viable opportunities, it's not serving your best interest. It's probably time to move on. And sometimes people have bought a home and, but if you have a home, sell it or rent it if you need to move. You're going to have a lot of homes in your lifetime. Most people, they're not going to live in the first house they have. You can always rent or sell your house out. You can call a realtor and you can put the house on the market. If it's a liability for your career, then, then that's not good. You're going to have to pay taxes on it. You're going to have to pay the mortgage or have to paint it. You're going to have to update it, whatever. But if you don't do these things, it's going to go away. So you need a job and it takes money to do all these things for your house. And the house expects you to pay for it. Just like finding new friends or significant other, you can find new homes and places to live anywhere. People have been building and buying and selling homes for thousands of years. They did it back in the time of Christ. They did it back 1,000 years before they were buying and selling homes. So, you can continue to take part in this tradition that's lasted thousands of years if you move somewhere else. I've heard all these reasons why people believe that they should, stay in different markets. And these are the big ones, and let me just tell you some of the more compelling reasons you should look as well. So unemployed people, you should look everywhere you possibly can, every city you possibly can. There's no reason not to look everywhere when you're unemployed. You can research markets, you can go and then you can research firms in your practice area. You can do a search in Google for, if I was in Bay City, you can do a search on Google for firms in your practice area and you will find firms you didn't know existed. I worked with an attorney that was a 10th year attorney from an Ivy League law school working as a bartender. Let me just graduate, not Ivy League, University of Chicago, had practiced for 10 years, Simpson Thatcher, I believe, and working as a bartender and had been working there for 10 years. He was not 10 years, for 2 years, he was an international arbitration attorney, had been working as a bartender for 2 years because he couldn't find a job and unemployed. He had, not been getting a job. So I got him a job after doing a video conference with a firm. Now, this may not be where you want to work, but I believe it was Fresh Fields in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. And he got a job and his career's back on track. So I meet people like this all the time. I got him a job doing his practice area in Saudi Arabia and he likes it, and I meet people like this all the time. They're everywhere you look. I mean, international arbitration is a very hard job to get a practice area, but he got one, and so if you're unemployed, there's a presumption among law firms reviewing your application, like I said, that there's something wrong with you. And their conclusions may be that you were fired, that you left your firm because you didn't like it, and we'll do the same thing again. Maybe you weren't, you had an ego, entitlement issues, they might think. They may think you were not doing good work and no one was giving you work. Now, this particular attorney I'm talking about, there was international arbitration. He'd been at his current firm for 10 years. So a lot of these presumptions, he obviously, probably was doing good work and probably wasn't fired. But, you could say you were laid off. It may have been, but the problem is that all law firms don't lay off people if you're unemployed. They always keep the best people around that they like and value when they do layoffs. They figure out who's adding the most value. And so, that's why, talking about a lot loss of, work will often fall on deaf ears. They won't care. You could talk about an important partner leaving, for example, but law firms are going to think the same way. If an important partner leaves, why didn't that important partner take you with them? So regardless of the reasons you're unemployed, it sends a bad signal. You can explain this, but a lot of firms won't care. The majority won't because there's tons of people in most markets that are employed that you're competing with, and so they don't need to take the risk. So if there's a lot of attorneys like you in your market, they're going to hire the ones that are employed. So you should look at smaller markets. There are just countless attorneys competing for the same jobs in New York City, for example. And unless you have some ultra rare experience, they're not going to find from a employed attorney. You're going to have a very difficult time competing with the attorneys for the best jobs that are already employed. So why would you stay there? There's no way you can compete with those attorneys unless you're not interested in, unless you're interested in taking a job that's not that good, maybe in a small law firm, or you may be in a small market and unemployed. And that's another good reason to look around because, there are fewer jobs in smaller markets. So maybe you want to look at a bigger market. And, unemployed attorneys, you just need to look at as many markets as possible. It's really your only option. It's the only option that's going to keep your career on track. The legal market is governed by the law of supply and demand. If there's a lot of attorneys like you, it's going to be difficult. If there's not a lot of attorneys, then they're going to, then it's going to be difficult for them to find people. And so law firms are self-interested. They're going to hire the best people they can find. There's fewer world-class attorneys interested in working in Detroit. I've had firms in Detroit looking for securities attorneys, the largest firms. They can't find people there, and they always go outside of that market to find them, almost always. And so, if you're going to have better jobs and getting a job in like Detroit, for example, than you might in New York. And, I'm out, outside of, from Detroit, I try to find out how it's a good market to work in. And then people say, I'd never work in Detroit. And, there's a lot of good places to live in Detroit, in suburbs. You can buy a 6,000 square foot house with a big lot in a safe neighborhood with good schools for what a 1,200 square foot house might cost in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of benefits. The small market and bad schools. If you're working in in Los Angeles, some of the markets, the suburbs are the best schools in the country and really good suburbs. And so it was one of the wealthiest cities in the world for several decades. And when cars and machines drove the economy, so there's good freeways, there's good schools. You can make partner much easier in Detroit than you could in a larger market. The attorneys from those markets from Detroit are respected. People think it's a big deal. They're attorneys, so people respect them. Where in major markets, they don't care. There's just too many of them, and it's not a big deal. Again, securities attorney would be very marketable in Detroit compared to Palo Alto because there's few of them. There's also a lot of in-house opportunities, a lot of companies there. They can't find as many attorneys as much. And by the way, most attorneys that find in-house jobs are finding them in places that aren't in their market. It's just interesting. So people get hired in Detroit that wouldn't get jobs in major markets. I've have an unemployed ERISA attorney, which is like ERISA employee benefits, got relocated from Texas to Detroit, never even been to Detroit. If you stayed in Detroit and Texas, you'd still be unemployed. People in the South, may think Atlanta and things that they don't want to work in Los Angeles because they picture a plastic economy with no substance inside, whatever. But Los Angeles has all these different little ecosystems. You can work someplace that's very, family oriented and, or conservative. There's all these different little towns all over LA that have their own cultures. And, there's different cultures in the west side and the east side of Los Angeles that have different personalities. And so, you can look in all over LA and find different cultures and different firms. People, from different areas of the country may love or hate New York, but it has, great suburbs and schools outside of the city you can take a train to. And, there's just all these various things in New York and like Detroit. And, so whatever the market is, you can, really do great things in that market. I mean, you have jobs and you should be looking everywhere. If you're losing your job or about to lose it, you should be looking everywhere. Like I said earlier, you're going to be 5 times or more likely to get a job when you're employed than unemployed. So do you feel insecure in your current job? And, when you're employed, your odds of getting a job are much better. So if you think you're going to lose your job or you're uncomfortable and things look bad, or there's issues, or there's not enough hours, you should be applying to every freaking place you possibly can, every market. And most recruiters will not ever help you with large markets. They'll have a few jobs in large markets. We have hundreds of places you can apply in most large markets, and even without jobs. But we also try to get people to apply to as many markets as possible. If you just apply to like 5 or 6 markets through BCG, I'll probably recommend over 1,000 places you can apply. 1,000 places, does that sound like too much? No, because out of those 1,000 places, a small percentage of the people are going to be interested in you. So you need to get a job. If you're just getting jobs from a recruiter on a piecemeal basis, they're only sending you jobs in large law firms that are very, very competitive. You need to figure out someone that's going to do that. No, I would say that 99.5% of recruiters aren't going to do that, but BCG does. And I'm not saying you need to use BCG for your search. I'm not trying to sell it, but you need to find a recruiter that can do that, and you probably won't. So then you need to figure out how to do it on your own. Again, the legal market is supply and demand. So where there's fewer attorneys, you're going to have a better chance of getting a job. Sometimes people are senior with no portable business, and senior means you have more than 7 years of experience. And most law firms are going to hire people for associate roles that have, have lower billing rates and aren't senior and don't have entitlement issues or haven't basically not been able to make partner or on a partnership track at a good sized law firm. So they'll bring in junior associates instead. And as you get more senior, your billing rate's going to go up, your salary is going to go up, and it's much harder for you to get a job. So, the people like junior to mid-level associates more because they're going to work really, really hard, and they're going to attempt to make partner, and they're going to, do all these things that a senior attorney might not do. So they're going to hire them. So law firms make partners of people, just so you understand, when there's a limited amount of hourly work, and those people, can work for large institutional clients and make them partner without business, but they don't often. They can be an income partner with a limited runway to generate business. So I work with partners that make income partners all the time, but the law firm gives them a few years to get business. If they don't, they become unemployed. That's not good. So if you're an associate and doing very well, and the law firm has institutional clients, maybe they make you partner, but most law firms don't have institutional clients like that. They will not make partner. If you become an income partner, you're going to have one shot at this often. Sometimes you won't. I mean, there's firms like Kirkland and Ellis that can keep you an income partner forever because they have such large clients, like I told you earlier. But if you don't have business and you become an income partner, you typically get one shot to generate business. In almost all cases, income partners don't. So they have to go in-house, but they often will not try working in a smaller market where they can, get work. They won't do that. So, most law firms after 8 or 10 years know that, attorneys that have to work these incredible hours and work really, really hard, after 10 years won't do that. They'll start thinking, I don't want to work so hard anymore. So the large law firms and law firms won't hire them. And so they'll figure out people that, are going to work harder because they know that senior attorneys often won't. So people, that's just how it works. And so you need to do that. So most attorneys don't have room for senior attorneys, and that's how it is. So why wouldn't you be trying to find, smaller markets, and the major markets, everything is usually up or out. Smaller markets, by the way, it's interesting. I mean, people will often make partner there, and it's easier to get clients because the clients are smaller. And you're in a large market, you have to generate these, massive like clients, public companies and things. Whereas if you're in a smaller market, you often don't have to. It's much easier. People will hire you because you're not billing rates aren't as high and all sorts of things. And most law firms aren't interested in senior attorneys without business in large markets, or they don't only will advance people when they have major clients. And so the only way for you to get a job if you're senior and not being able to get a job in a large law firm is to look at all sorts of markets. And there's going to be law firms that don't have people to do certain types of work in large and smaller markets. Maybe they need people that are incredible brief writers or can do the real estate transactions with a level of detail that people are trained to do in large law firms that they're not in smaller law firms and smaller markets. So a lot of times people relocate to markets. I've been working with, for whatever reason, a lot of trust and estates attorneys just recently that where there's attorneys in smaller markets that are getting ready to retire and want someone to take over all their work and service all these people that are going to die soon and need ongoing trust and estates work. They're not going to die, but the partners in these smaller markets can't find people. And they're even interested in people with like 2 or 3 years of experience that can take over the work. So people are getting interviews and futures and things in these smaller markets because they're going to be taking over work. And this wouldn't happen if they were looking at larger markets. And so, you need to find law firms that can do that. And in order to find law firms that can make money from you, if you're a senior attorney, you need to look at all the markets you possibly can, and you won't even have to, worship the partners, in whatever large market you're in to get ahead. And you won't have to work incredible hours. And so, most law firms, most, attorneys will not look at these, smaller markets, and, they just don't. And there's all sorts of places you can look and work in small markets if you're a senior. Sometimes people are niche practice areas. So there are niche practice areas like trademark, for example, or project finance or government contracts or white collar litigation where there's just not enough attorneys in smaller markets. But if there's a trademark, if someone's a trademark attorney, there might only be a few jobs in a major market. There might only be 50 decent jobs all over the country, but a lot of those are in smaller markets where there's no one like them. So I've placed trademark attorneys in Grand Rapids, Michigan. No one to do trademark is available in Grand Rapids. So they have to go outside. So these unemployed trademark attorneys have gotten jobs in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which you might not even have heard of. There's people that do government contracts that get jobs in smaller markets where there's not enough, or there's too many of them in Washington, D.C., because there's all sorts of people that did it with the government or are at law firms doing it. So if you're in a niche practice area, there may not be a lot of large firms in large markets doing what you're doing. The trademark attorney that I placed in Grand Rapids recently was a trademark attorney that worked in Las Vegas, which is a weird market. There certainly weren't, any trademark jobs in Grand Rapids, and they moved in Las Vegas. The person was 15 years out of law school. They were able to get a job in Grand Rapids, and they wouldn't have got a job in LA. They wouldn't have got a job in Las Vegas. They wouldn't have got a job in Arizona. They had to move to Grand Rapids, and that was what they did. There might only, again, there it might be a bunch of trademark attorneys and jobs in different markets. And so, if you want to continue working as a trademark attorney, your only realistic option is going to be to look around the country. So I place trademark, patent, international finance, project finance, and all these people that look in other markets where there's no jobs for them. So you have to look at other markets. If you're a niche practice area, you have to look at other markets. You have no choice because that's the only place where there are jobs. You can't stay in the market you're on if you want to continue in your career. And a lot of patent attorneys will have, long and fruitful careers even without business. I had a patent partner in working at Hogan Lovells, I believe, in Colorado. Because of his age, he was forced to retire, which a lot of large law firms do. I got him a job in San Antonio, Texas, that did the exact type of work he did. He was working with optical lenses or something that were people put in satellites and things like that. And he had a niche practice area doing that. And he was able to get a job in San Antonio. He couldn't believe I got him a job. The firm in San Antonio couldn't believe I found him. And he hadn't even been to Texas. So he's still there. This is like 10 years ago. He's well past retirement age. He's like 75, still working there because he found a firm in Texas where he'd never been, or I found him a firm that did the exact kind of work he did. I just searched the database in BCG for whatever this optical thing was. And I saw that firm that had a bunch of jobs in the future past, and I found that firm for him. So if you're locked down in one market like him, you would have had to retire. You wouldn't have had a job. And so he was able to get a job. And, if you want to remain in a niche practice area that you're in, you have to move markets many times. Some people are not in niche practice areas, and their practice area may be slow in the major markets. So litigation, corporate, real estate, those practice markets, practice areas go up and down. During recessions, corporate can get very slow. Even in good economies, sometimes litigation can get slow. So the only way you can possibly stay gainly poised is look at other markets. And, there may be opportunities in your market. And, one of the major, issues when those markets slows down is there's going to be too many highly qualified attorneys and people from good law schools and things that are getting laid off and from big firms. And so, they move to smaller markets to during these recessions, and they can move back. And but the people you're competing with, it's just going to be very difficult because the best attorneys are losing their jobs or getting laid off or looking at smaller firms. And so looking at, outside your market may be the best choice. Sometimes attorneys have a bad reputation and enemies in the market. I saw one woman, I've saved so many careers. I saw one woman from a large law firm that was blacklisted for some reason. I don't know what happened, but she had a bad reputation in her market. And I got her jobs in Palo Alto and, other places. And when she got to Palo Alto, she learned a new practice area doing software services agreements at an IP firm. And she got just awesome experience doing that. And then she lost her job and she was able to, when that happened, she was able to start her own firm, but she got out of Atlanta and moved to California because she had a bad reputation in that market. I don't know what happened, but she was unemployed and people found out about that when she would get offers and interviews and things. They would check her references and got horrible, recommendations. Sometimes, they won't do it if you're employed, but they'll do an informal reference check that, it can often happen after you're hired. Someone will mention you worked there, or the law firm will call someone. They may not look for bad information, but they'll say, would you hire the person again? The firm will say no. And, so these sort of reference checks happen. And, it happens in large markets often. And, so if you're fired for doing something, you may get an informal reference check. I had a guy that was in Madison, Wisconsin. He'd been unemployed for about a year. I got him another job in Madison. And then because that was a small market for patent attorneys and there weren't a lot of jobs, someone checked his references or someone, when they found out where he was working, they might even have called the firm he was at and told them bad things about him. He lost his job and he's still in Madison, Wisconsin. If he looked at other markets besides Madison, he would be employed, but he's not. So he's sitting there unemployed, not doing well. And if he was looking at other markets, he would have gotten jobs. So because he has enemies. So, you need to try to look in other jobs, if these informal reference checks are happening, you're not getting jobs. So I've seen this in all sorts of markets. And so you should be looking in other markets if you have, you're going to get, bad reviews. There's practice areas like bankruptcy that have a very small group of attorneys that do it. And so they kind of all know each other in that practice area, if it's a niche practice area. And people will say things about them to other attorneys in that practice area. So bankruptcy, even in Los Angeles, has a small bar. All those bankruptcy attorneys know each other. They trade job openings. If there's a partner in that bankruptcy group in your city, they can check references with other people there. So you'll be penalized. Sometimes you're just in a slow market that's slow. And, and what do you do then? You have to look at, other markets and that's good. You have to, if there's not a lot of opportunities, you can sit there and wait and apply for openings. Sometimes people will say, oh, I've applied for all the openings. I'm not getting interviews. Well, that's because, there's probably too many people doing that practice area. So, if you're secure in your practice area, you can wait. But if you're not, you have to look at other markets. Your market may be too small. So there's not a lot of jobs there. If you're in a small market, maybe there's only a few jobs at one time, or maybe there's not a lot of law firms to do the practice area. And even a mid-sized market may be small, or you whatever it is, you have to look at other markets. And small markets can make it impossible for you to find a job. So you have to be able to move law firms. And if you're in a small market, and you have to look at markets where there are jobs. So you can look in your whole state and there'll be jobs, or you can look in just smaller markets in different states and there'll be jobs. So you have to be searching. If you're like on Indeed or something, you should do a search for every place you can find in the frickin' country or every firm that's in your practice area that has a job. But not only that, you should be applying to firms that don't have openings. And so people don't do that. Sometimes your market is too small, and all that means is there's going to be very highly qualified attorneys for the jobs you're applying to. So you just aren't going to be the most qualified attorney based on your law school or your practice area. So, you may be doing corporate, like I said earlier, and there's not enough positions. And so all it means is in the large markets, there's going to be more competition. So it's often easier, much easier to get a job in a smaller market because it's about the law of supply and demand. You're not competing with people. So people in New York City, can relocate to smaller markets where they have training and experience and can be much higher valued. Here's another thing that happens. A substantial percentage of the attorneys that I place move home, meaning they move to where they're from. This is very, very easy because when you relocate to your home market, law firms are thinking there's going to be stability stability. You're going to go to that market and you're going to stay. Your family's there, you're going to stay. Your network of contacts you're going to stay. You went to high school there or whatever, and you're going to stay. So they're going to think you have a support network, meaning people. They're going to think that you're going to bring that experience back. So people, will work in a big market like New York and then decide to locate home to Cincinnati. If they were looking in New York, they'd hardly get any interviews, but then they locate to Cincinnati and they're getting interviews with all the large law firms and that are there and all the mid-sized law firms, because even when those firms don't have openings, those firms are going to think this person's going to come here and they're going to stay, and they like that. So the law firm's going to feel proud showing these attorneys, it's going to feel proud that they have these highly qualified attorneys that are working in that market now that got experience in big markets. So even if you're not in a niche practice area, I mean, a big firm, they're going to like you more. They're going to think that you're not fired, that you're just relocating home because you have a support network and family there. And so what does that mean? It means that also that if you're relocating home, they're going to think that you haven't been fired at your existing job or you're not losing your job. Whereas if you're relocating within the market, they think, hey, there might be some issues with this person. But if you're relocating to your home market, they're going to think, if you're relocating within the market, they're going to be more suspicious of you because they're going to think maybe you're relocating to another firm in your same market because you're having problems. But they're not going to think that when you're trying to relocate to a smaller market, especially if you grew up there. They're going to think that you're going to go there and buy a house. They're going to think that you're going to go there and get married and have children and do all these sorts of things that are going to make you more likely to commit to your job. Just one side point. Law firms love it when you buy houses. They love it when you get married. They love it when you have children because that means you're going to have to continue working. And so you're not going to leave and do something else. They like it. So people also like it when people relocate to an existing market that they're from because they believe that they're going to settle down. Maybe the smaller market, there's not a lot of firms like them or jobs, for example, and they think you're going to stay there because, there's not as many opportunities. You're going to get a lot more interviews. And when you're relocating home, you should be applying to all the firms you can find in that market, not just openings. And, sometimes, the law firms in the major markets won't do that. So, you have to look at that. So you apply to a wider variety of places. So those are some of the kind of the major reasons. There's certainly a lot more reasons than that I could give you. But relocating to the market you're from is honestly a really good one too. So there's all sorts of reasons that you should be looking at other firms and looking at firms in other markets and just looking at a much wider variety of places because that's where the jobs may be. That's where there's opportunity and that's where you can stay employed and do all these things. So attorneys, like I said, spend a lot of times going to school. They join law firms and training to become attorneys. I mean, they go to school, they may lose their job for a variety of reasons, or they just may need to look elsewhere for their practice area. So regardless of why you're looking for a job, looking in these other markets are often the absolute smartest thing you can do. Everybody should be doing that. They should realize that they're going to be valued differently in different markets and they may be in the market they're at. What's valued in one market may not be flying off the shelves in another. And confining your search to one market is just could drastically limit your career markets. In your career, there's always going to be places where you're valued more than the market you're in. People just do not see a lot of attorneys like you. So if you look at smaller markets, those attorneys may never get applications or unsolicited applications, and those firms may never get an unsolicited application. But when they see you, they're like, hey, we can make money from this person. So, people I've placed who have never been able to get a job in another market when they relocate, corporate attorneys that lose their job, for various reasons. I've recently placed one that got a job because she was, sick for half the year in San Francisco, and then no one would hire her. I got her a position in Kentucky where she'd never been from. She got no interviews in San Francisco or even in California, but she relocated to Kentucky and got a job. People in California will get jobs in places like Fresno or Sacramento or Bakersfield, where a lot of people don't want to work. These are just not nice places for most people when they think about where they're working, but they get jobs there. I recently placed a senior environmental attorney that couldn't get a job in Los Angeles. She got a job in San Diego. A senior real estate attorney that couldn't find work in Texas. They'd been out of work for 3 years. Got this person a job in Southern California, which is a big market. Again, never been to California, even throughout the interview, before the interview. A patent attorney that couldn't find work in Colorado, I'll give you that example. A junior corporate attorney couldn't find any work after a 6-month job search. IP litigator couldn't find work in Washington, D.C., found a position in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he was never from. Patent attorney in Rochester, New York, found a position in Boulder. Bankruptcy attorney in Nevada, looking to work in a, excuse me, a major city, got a position in New York City when there was a lot of demand there. Trademark and attorney, position in Texas. These placements at BCG happen weekly because these attorneys decide that they're going to look in other markets, since these people never would have gotten jobs, in those markets. Looking at other markets got them positions. So we'll take a quick break just so everybody can take a break just for like a minute or two. When I come back, I will answer any questions you have. So the questions can be about this presentation, or they can be about any type of questions you may have about your career. So, or anything related to whatever you're going through or experiencing as an attorney. So we'll take a quick break, and then when I come back, we'll take questions. Hopefully you took notes during this, because, or at least, what I talked about helped you a lot. Is really one of the probably the most important, things you can do when looking for a job. Countless careers we've saved doing this. Countless careers have gotten people into firms that appreciate their talents and skills, but they wouldn't have gotten without doing this. So back in 1 minute. When I come back, I'll take questions. Thank you. Okay, question. Give me 1 second. Okay, question. Give me 1 second. Okay, and again, the questions and answers are honestly probably one of the most important parts of the webinar, because I think that here, we answer questions that people that are important to people in terms of, make sure I get it, that are not covered in the webinar. So I like these. 1 second. Okay, so first question is, oh my God, this is not working out for me so far. I don't know why I'm having issues with the questions. Give me 1 second. All right, give me 1 second here. Okay, so got all the questions here. This is good. Okay, so I will try not to show if you ask questions and your name shows, I will try not to answer it. So let me answer these questions. Okay, so the first question is, what are the best practice areas for long-term career stability in the law? So that's a very good question. There are practice areas that are very difficult for career stability. Some of those practice areas are going to be things, like I talked about earlier, like government contracts and, and certain practice areas. So I will go over right now a lot of the practice areas that are going to be stable and the ones that aren't. So it's a very good question, because you may be in a practice area that's not stable. So your best practice areas that are going to be stable are often the ones that are not going to pay the most money for people that are getting their first jobs out of law school. So a lot of times people will think, hey, I want to practice in a certain practice area because it's like the one where people are going to make the most money when they're right out of law school or when they're associates. But in reality, the practice areas that are going to be the most stable and the easiest to find positions are not going to be the ones that everybody is looking at. And also, you have to be very careful when you get out of law school or when you get into any practice area, because you may be going into a practice area where if you lose your job, it's going to be very, very difficult to find another one. So because the practice area is niche and there may not be jobs on your market, or there may not be a lot of jobs all over the country for it. So your practice areas are going to be difficult would be alcohol and beverage law, antitrust and competition, art museum law. Bankruptcy may not be stable in your market because there's not a big bankruptcy bar. But if you were doing consumer bankruptcy, where you're doing bankruptcy for individuals, there are going to be a lot of jobs. So you need to think about that. I had one woman that came to work for me from UCLA. She was very smart. I was giving her commercial litigation, and she decided she was going to break off and start her own practice. And she did it in bankruptcy, consumer bankruptcy, and she became very successful. She didn't even know anything about consumer bankruptcy, but she decided to start her own practice and did that. Very smart. Cannabis law is hard. Construction law is not. There are not enough construction law attorneys, and so you can get those jobs all over the country doing that. But you know, there's always going to be need for construction attorneys. Construction corporate law can be a very hard job to get practice areas in larger markets, but corporate is actually very good for corporate generalist work in all sorts of markets. M&A, corporate general, there's always going to be need for people to do general corporate work, but some of these niche practice areas in corporate, which would be like, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. I'm sorry, I apologize. Jeez, I'm not doing that. Okay, so I apologize for that, but some of the smaller corporate practice areas, which might be securities, technology transactions, and corporate investment management, those are going to be hard jobs to have stability in a lot of cases because those are niche practice areas. So there may not be a lot of jobs for those, but corporate general, there's always going to be jobs. Criminal law defense is a very easy job practice area to have stability in. It doesn't pay a lot, but at the same time, that particular practice area is very, very stable. There are jobs for criminal defense attorneys in every single market. So that's a very good one for stability. Data privacy is not. There's not a lot of jobs for data privacy attorneys in the country. So that's not a practice area that has stability. It may have stability if you want to go in-house, but not in law firms. So you can get jobs in-house doing that, but not in law firms. Education is a very stable practice area. You can always have stability there because there's always going to be jobs for education attorneys in every market, whether it's in a law firm, you're going to be able to find them in most markets, or it's working at a university or a school system. Energy, oil, and gas is a difficult job for stability because there's not a lot of markets that do that. There's Texas and there's Pennsylvania. There's, some markets in Oklahoma, but in general, there's not a lot of stability. Entertainment is another one where there's not a lot of stability. There's just not a lot of jobs. People think, oh, I want to go into entertainment law, but no, there's not a lot of jobs. Environmental land use, same thing. There are land use jobs in most major markets. There's a lot of them. There's not a good enough supply of them, but other types of, environmental land use and zoning and land use is a good one, but other types of practice areas, mining law, water law and stuff are very hard. ERISA, there's not enough ERISA attorneys, so there are a lot of jobs in that, more attorneys in ERISA and executive compensation. There are people. So that actually can be very stable in larger markets, but there's not a lot of jobs. Family law. So ERISA executive compensation attorneys can typically get jobs and work throughout their careers doing that. I'll try to work through these a little bit fast because I know that I'm taking a lot of time. Finance, not a lot of jobs. Food and drug law, not a lot of jobs. And finance, larger markets, not a lot of jobs. And smaller markets, not a lot of jobs. Food and drug law, franchise law, not a lot of jobs. And general practice, yes, a lot of jobs for that. That would be litigation and also corporate related work. Healthcare, not enough attorneys doing that. So that's a stable practice area. Immigration, consumer facing work, a lot of jobs. You can always have stability doing that. Insurance defense, a lot of jobs, and you can always have stability doing insurance defense. Plaintiffs work, trucking and auto defense, insurance plaintiff, trucking and auto plaintiffs, a lot of jobs, not enough attorneys. Intellectual property, there's stability in patent work, but you have to look at other markets. But patent attorneys without business can always stay employed their entire careers. IP litigation, not a lot of jobs, very difficult. Trademark, copyright, not a lot of jobs. patent agents, labor and employment plaintiffs work. There's always a lot of jobs. Litigation, employer defense, always a lot of jobs. You can stay employed. Traditional labor law, not a lot of attorneys. Wage and hour plaintiffs, a lot of jobs. Same thing with defense work, litigation. There's all these different types of litigation. So I'm not going to go through all of them because there's so many of them. But anything that's plaintiffs related, there's always going to be a lot of positions. Anything that's defense related, not as many jobs, but there are jobs in healthcare defense, medical malpractice defense. There's always a lot of jobs in labor and employment. Mass torts, there's always a lot of plaintiffs' jobs, including in smaller markets. Medical malpractice defense and plaintiffs, always a lot of jobs. Personal injury defense and plaintiffs' work, always a lot of jobs. Product liability plaintiffs and defense, always a lot of jobs. Professional liability defense and plaintiffs, always a lot of jobs. Real estate, no. Securities litigation, no. But there's a lot of plaintiffs' work in larger markets, enough attorneys. Tax, all these different ones, not a lot of jobs. Trust and estates litigation, there are a lot of jobs. Workers and compensation, workers' compensation defense and plaintiffs, a lot of jobs. And then that's about it. Municipal law, not enough attorneys. So that's a good one. Real estate, always a lot of jobs. You can work for developers, you can work in smaller firms. And then trust and estates, always a ton of jobs. There's not enough trust and estates attorneys anywhere in the country. This is the smartest practice area of all the practice areas anyone can go in. And then workers' compensation. So those are the practice areas where you're going to be able to find a position. So this is actually a great question. And if you are interested in those practice areas, the ones I mentioned, you can always find jobs. And the big point to make with these practice areas that's important is anytime you can go into a practice area that's consumer facing, meaning you're working for individuals as opposed to companies, there's always going to be more jobs than there are. That there's always going to be fewer attorneys than there are jobs. Give me 1 second. Okay. Hi, Harrison. Let's see. I'm going to go not take these all in order that they received, but I'll get to all the questions. Okay, specific question. I graduated from a top 15 law school and passed the bar in 2018. However, my path was delayed because I was wrongfully convicted and incarcerated as a teenager. Despite that, I pushed through, completed law school, and was recently exonerated. Following my exoneration, the New York Court of Appeals granted me a waiver that has allowed me to move forward with getting a license in New York. So that's not good situation. I'm reentering the market with a background in criminal defense, but I'm open to generally consider exploring other areas of law as well. Yeah, you can explore other areas. The big thing for you is going to be getting, if you say you're exonerated, getting that criminal attention, criminal career, criminal conviction. What is it? I mean, when it's expunged. So you try to get it expunged from your record. If you were unemployed and it took that much time for you to get a position, yes, you can get positions in smaller firms, especially doing criminal law. You can also start your own practice in trust and estates or criminal law or consumer bankruptcy or any type of plaintiff's work. You can start your own practice. Many attorneys actually have, especially smart attorneys, have incredible careers doing something like personal injury. I've seen people that couldn't get jobs that I know in LA out of Southwestern and out of Loyola Law School. It took them 2 years. Then they ended up starting a plaintiffs related firm and they are incredibly rich. They're, two of them actually have their own jets, not super expensive jets, like 2 million, but they have their own jets. They're very rich and wealthy, and they never got any training in personal injury, and they just went into it and were very interested and very quickly got very good careers. You get one $5 million settlement, which isn't too hard to do as a personal injury attorney, and you are going to get $2 million. I've seen people do it in trust and estates. I know another guy that graduated from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, moved to Malibu, California, right out of law school, started a firm there, and then within 3 years bought a $5 million house, which means, to buy a $5 million house, you need at least $2 million down after taxes, which is 50% or more in California. So that means he was able to make at least $2 million and probably show income of $60,000 a month. I mean, you can do all sorts of things working for yourself where no one cares about your criminal conviction and no one's even going to know about it. You can get it expunged. You can, all sorts of things. So why would you be looking at firms that care about your unemployment? I just don't get it. But you could get jobs in those markets. But, if you decide not to work for someone else, you clearly had some sort of income coming in for the past 6 years. You can do that, or you can get a job in a different state or a smaller market in California where there's not a lot of people like you, where they may not even ask questions about you. Just say, I didn't, I waited a while to take the bar or whatever. You can make all sorts of excuses and get a job. So, that's, I don't think, I'm not really convinced that you have a serious problem unless you want to work for a major firm. Then it's going to be harder because they're going to ask questions about that. But if you're not, why, who cares? Just work in a smaller practice area. You can do better financially. You can, have all these advantages you wouldn't. Okay, how do I balance bill hours with business development as an associate? So I know an attorney in Los Angeles that has $30 million in business. He decided he would bill 2,000 hours a year in his firm and spend the other $2,000 a year, 2,000 hours going out and meeting people, giving advice for free, and just traveling around LA, meeting different people, and was able to he actually hired a driver when he was an associate to drive him around. He was making $300,000 a year, so had the money to do so, and he decided he was going to spend time doing that. And basically, that's what you have to do. You have to figure it out. You can certainly connect on LinkedIn and so forth, but if you're going out and meeting people, that's going to help you a lot more than it would if you're just sitting there, trying to connect with people on LinkedIn or whatever you're doing. But you can do it. You can call people that have different matters. You can go out and have dinners and lunches and things, and that's what people do that get business. So you need to build that into what you're going to do. I was single for a while, when I was, I don't know, in high school and college, and not very long, but someone said to me something once that I'll never forget. People that don't want to be single anymore, they figure out how to meet people. That's just what they do. Or they figure out how to talk to people. That's just what they do. They go out and do it. And it's the same thing with finding it, with getting a good job or whatever, or developing business. You have to figure it out, just like you'd figure out how to meet, a mate. So figure it out and, read about it or whatever, and read articles that I've written about getting business, and you figure it out. And, and that's kind of how it works. You realize that the importance of getting business is just as important as billing hours in your firm and doing well there. And you end up doing that. What are the benefits of working with a recruiter at BCG Attorney Search? So when you work with BCG, because we take your job search so seriously, you have two ways of doing it. You can work with a recruiter at BCG, which, certain people will be, or you can just work with BCG. And so if you work with BCG, meaning BCG will send you opportunities, BCG will, work with you once you approve firms of trying to get you out to all the different places and then do that. But the benefits of working with BCG are that we will not just submit you to jobs, but we'll help you apply to firms that we think are good matches for you in any market you want to go to. So that could be hundreds of firms, and that will increase your odds. Once you do get interviews, we'll work with you and prepare you for interviews and make sure you do that. We will interact with all the firms on your behalf after we submit you. So we'll do all of the submissions to the firms, all the work of doing personalized applications for each firm. We'll do that. We will follow up on your applications after sending them. So you're not just applying, you're having us reach out to firms repeatedly, just as you would get job alerts from a job site like Indeed or Law Crossing. The firms will get alerts of all the candidates that are pending with them. Maybe there's just one, but they'll get the equivalent of a job alert. So the idea of working with BCG is we're drastically going to increase your odds of getting a position far more than you would ever do on your own. We will excel at that, and we'll do the absolute best we can to make sure that you're in front of the places that will hire you, that you're well prepared for interviews. So if we prepare someone for interviews, there are probably, if 2 out of 10 people are able to convert, or 1 out of 10 people are able to convert an interview into to a job. When I prepare people, or the company does, it's 4 out of 5 get the job. So those are some of the benefits of using BCG, to find a position. Okay, so let me see. So what are some of the ways that I can demonstrate to an employer that I should be hired in an area of law when I've never worked in that practice area? Thank you for your insights into markets. Okay, so if you're a law firm and they're hiring a lateral attorney, meaning they're hiring someone to work there laterally, and so they're hiring a second or third year attorney, how can you do that? Well, the first thing is if you were a law firm and you had to choose for a lateral position, someone that was in that practice area and had experience versus someone that's not, then it's obviously going to be much harder for you to get a job compared to someone that's experienced in that practice area, unless there's something special about you. So something special would be you have a very good education and that shows a high level of motivation, and you're currently working in a really good firm in another practice area. So one example would be I recently placed a patent attorney that had gone to University of Michigan, that was, which is a good law school, and then wanted to transition into environmental law. So she was in Palo Alto. I got her a job, not in Palo Alto, but doing environmental work in Sacramento, because there weren't a lot of people like her with that type of motivation in that market for that type of position. She had compelling reasons for wanting to do it. They were personal in nature. She'd majored in like environmental science or something as a minor in college. So that was something that made her stick out and had that. Sometimes attorneys will want to do data privacy. Maybe they're a corporate attorney and they go and they get a data privacy certification that shows their motivation. Sometimes people might have been a nurse before they go to law school. That shows a motivation and maybe being a healthcare attorney that they wouldn't have otherwise. So that looks good. Law firms can be interested in people like that with experience. Sometimes people may have wanted to be a tax attorney, didn't have any tax experience. When it got an LLM, same thing in practice areas like, they could do it in healthcare law, they could do it in different practice areas, get an LLM. So those are some of the ways, but just remember smaller markets can help you, niche practice areas, but you get an LLM can help you, and trying to apply to firms where you have some sort of previous motivation that shows up in your resume can help you as well. Okay. I stupidly stayed somewhere due to having friends. Guess what? They moved away. And as you say, you can always make new friends. Yes, that's true. Okay. What would you advise to get back on track after completing an L? Is it in a challenging job market? How can I now find one job to avoid a prolonged gap after studying, despite having applied to numerous places? Okay, so you may have applied to numerous places, but again, this sort of, let me just hear, thing is ridiculous that you can't get a job. So let me just see. Give me 1 second. So I'm going to give this example to everybody right now. I'm going to show you how important it is. So this particular example right here, I'm looking at the top 250 largest US cities right now by population. You can see all these different places, these top US cities by population. You can see little, give me 1 second. Sorry, give me 1 second. I don't know what I'm doing here. Maybe this isn't working. Give me 1 second. It's just like my screen is locking. So maybe that's not the wait. This particular thing is not loading. Not sure what. So I don't know what's wrong. Maybe my screen isn't loading for whatever reason. Okay, Wikipedia. Okay, so oh, here we go. Here's a map of all these cities. You have Indianapolis, you have Oklahoma City, you have El Paso's number 23, you have all Jacksonville, Florida, and then you look at all these cities. So people a lot of times won't think about all the cities they could work in. So you could work in Lincoln, Nebraska, Durham, North Carolina, Greenstone, North Carolina, and all of these cities, they have hundreds of thousands of people in them. Port St. Lucia, Florida, where you could work and look at these changes. Like some of these cities are growing, others are shrinking. So why wouldn't you go to a city that's growing by 22%? where the number of people is drastically increasing. Maybe you got an LLM in tax law, and that would enable you to trust in the states, or maybe trust in the states people need people that are tax law attorneys. So, looking at all these different Boise, Idaho, or Worcester, Massachusetts, or Huntington Beach, California, or Cary, North Carolina. So people will not look at these smaller markets. And so regardless of what your LLM is, I guarantee you that there will be firms in Springfield, Colorado, which has 170,000 people in it, that you can work in. These ones with population increases. You go down here and Palm Bay, Florida is increased by 18.5%. So these are the markets you should be applying to. Most people don't. They think, oh, I've got this degree. I should be applying to firms in New York City or Phoenix, Arizona, or San Diego, California, or Dallas, Texas, when in reality, you're limiting yourself by not applying to all these different markets. And, people that are looking for jobs in Los Angeles or New York won't think about applying to positions in Indianapolis. They think, I don't want to work in Indiana. But if they did, they would get jobs probably. So, why wouldn't you do that? And this is something that very few people do. It's insane. And, if you have an LM and you feel like you're not getting jobs, you just need to apply to other markets. And I'm sorry, but, this is an absolute mess, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should be applying to smaller markets. Anybody that's having a hard time getting a job, anybody that's unemployed. If you're in New York City, why wouldn't you apply to Indianapolis? I had this one firm in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I had this woman that had been a litigator at a big firm in like Richards Layton or something and doing corporate work in Wilmington, Delaware, had lost her job and not corporate work, she was doing litigation work in Wilmington, Delaware, had lost her job and started a little law firm her on her own doing corporate work in for firms all over the country that needed someone that could file documents in Delaware because they couldn't do it. They couldn't, the person couldn't, what do you call it? The person couldn't get a job there. And Wilmington, Delaware, law firms all over the country need people that were barred there and could do that with just filing corporate documents. She literally contacted firms all over the country saying she could help them and got all this work and then wanted to go to a firm that did corporate law, got a job in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so she looked at other markets and she'd never been to Fort Wayne and so forth. Then I had another one attorney that was very senior, like in his 60s, and had lost a job in a big firm as counsel. And he was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and couldn't get a job, of course, in Pennsylvania, and got a job at the same firm of Fort Wayne that just happened to have a lot of corporate work. So you can do that. I mean, that's I think can help you. Okay, next question is, what steps should I take to become partner at my law firm? So the steps you should take is you should work as hard as you possibly can and bill as many hours to become a partner. So that's one thing that the firms will look at. And then in addition to working a lot of hours at your law firm, you should spend time trying to develop business. So the people that are able to develop business, law firms, when they hire partners, the thing to think about is law firms need attorneys with business. So that's the most important thing in the world to them, because if you have business, they can make money off you. So if you have business, what happens is the law firm becomes something that supports you and not the other way around. What I mean by support you, I mean it supports your book of business. So what does that mean? So a law firm that supports your book of business, you'll bring in, say, $1 million, or say you bring in $2 million a year in business. The law firm typically will take 30 to 50% of the revenue that you work on yourself. So if you bring in $2 million in revenue, maybe they pay you $666,000 a year, and they keep the other 1.4 million to give money to their staff to support you in office space and computers and paralegals and all that sort of stuff. And then the other 1.4 million, they also will allocate towards profits for maybe partners that have been there a longer time, or they just split up those profits with you and other people that are generating business. So law firms do not exist essentially to give associate people jobs. They exist to, and they certainly do need associate level attorneys to do work for partners, but in general, they exist for the partners and the people in business. They are service. things that support partners. And so they are not places just for associates. They're more places that support partners. That's what they exist for. And so having business is the most important thing you can do to make a partner in a law firm. Once you get business, everybody will hire you, or most firms will hire you if they can make money off you and support you. So you make the only way to be employed, to stay employed, and to have a good career is by being a partner in a law firm. Once you become a partner, law firms will hire you. Most law firms will hire you if they believe that you can come there and do work. It's as simple as that. And so you need to become a partner, and becoming a partner means dedicating time to business development, which should be as much time as you're billing. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. So if you bill 1,800 hours, you want to try to dedicate 1,800 hours to developing business. You can develop a social networking profile. And have articles about that. You can or do post about that. LinkedIn, develop LinkedIn followers and connect to people that are in-house. You can do that. If you're a litigation attorney, you can call companies and in-house counsel for firms that have been sued about something. If you're a real estate attorney, you can contact developers. You can contact people that are, that run apartment buildings or, commercial buildings. You can contact them about doing real estate work. The same thing if you're a patent attorney, you can find, companies with patents. You can find all these different people. You can research, get daily alerts from the court of companies that are sued and contact the companies. You can do all these things. You can figure out how to do it. You can contact your network. So one of the best ways of getting business is to write down every single person you know and stay in touch with them. Because if you have 200 people that you know, or 100 or 50, they will also know 100 or 50 people and will be spreading news about you that you're an attorney. You don't even have to tell those people when you contact them, you're not contacting them for business, you're just staying in touch with them, and they're going to tell people you're an attorney when they meet them. So there's all these things you can do. I mean, I've seen people get huge clients from a clerk in a grocery store that, someone they're buying meat from or something because that person asked them what they do. And then they tell them, and that person might have a son or someone that's a partner in a huge law firm. You do all these things, or not a partner, but runs a company, owns a company, a big company, or they work for a big company. You can do all these things to get business. It's not that hard, but you have to figure out how to do them. Okay, how can I switch practice areas? I spoke about that one already, so let's get that one done. Let's see. How do I negotiate a higher salary as an associate in a law firm? Well, if you're an associate in a law firm, the only way to negotiate a higher salary is going to be to either join a firm that pays more, or in your existing firm, you can negotiate a higher salary if you're the only associate. You can't necessarily in your practice area and in your class level. So law firms don't want to pay people that are the same class level a higher salary because that's not fair to the people that are there, and everyone always talks about their salaries. So that's not something that you can negotiate when you're in a law firm if there's other people in your class level at your level. So that's very, very difficult to do. You can try, but most law firms won't do that. But you can do that if there's not other people at your class level. You can try to negotiate a higher salary. You can do that if you can do that if you try to move to another firm. So people will get jobs at other firms where they may not be other people at their salary level, and they can negotiate a higher salary when the law firm is trying to hire them. It is not a big deal. If you're billing out $500 an hour, and I'm just giving you an example at your new firm, and the law firm is paying you $200,000 a year, but you're going to bill, if you bill 500 hours, if you bill 2,000 hours a year, 2,000 hours times 500 is $1 million a year. So if the law firm offers you 200,000, it's really not a big deal for them to even pay you $100,000 more because they're still generating 700,000. $100,000 more would be, basically, of a $200,000 salary where you're generating $1 million a year would only cut into their profits or whatever additional revenue they're generating by 100,000 out of 700,000 that's left over if you're billing 2,000 hours a year. So it's not a big deal. So law firms will negotiate your salary if they're generating a lot of money off you and if they know they can. So why wouldn't they try to hire the best attorney at a little bit higher salary if they can? So you can, with that sort of information, you can negotiate a higher salary. If you're being employed, getting a job, at a firm that, can afford to do that or can't find a people like you, then they will often negotiate a higher salary. Not always, but they will. Sometimes they won't like it, but they will. And, that's kind of where it puts you if you're an associate. If you're a partner, you can always negotiate a higher salary as well, because if you're billing out $750 an hour, that's 1.5 million that you'll generate for them. Or if you have that much business, you're generating 1.5 million. If they offer you 750,000, you negotiate an additional 100,000, they're still clearing 1.125 million from you to support their staff and to have profits. So those are kind of the conditions where you can negotiate a higher salary. Okay, as a new attorney in a new market, a company invited me to join as a company in Beijing. Thoughts? Sure. I mean, if you don't want to work in a law firm, you can join a company. If you join a company, the problem with working in-house is that there's typically not as many opportunities in-house as there would be in law firms. So, because you're not getting training in a very specific practice area that's marketable, working in-house, you're also not getting, the work is not as sophisticated because if a company has sophisticated work, it's not going to have an in-house attorney do it, especially, if you don't have training in that practice area. So law firms will not hire people from in-house most of the time. The reason they don't hire people from in-house is because, the decision to go in-house means you're leaving behind a law firm, getting business and doing work at a high level that a law firm is expected to do because the people are paying it a lot of money. What happens in in-house jobs is the most sophisticated work is generally farmed out to law firms, and then the attorney that goes in-house is often showing that they don't want to work in a law firm. So not doing a sophisticated work. In-house attorneys often become experts in referring work out, not doing it themselves. And also there's no way for a law firm to judge the quality of the work an in-house company is doing, where they would understand that quality and so forth very well when they're hiring another law firm. So if you're working at Skadden Arps in Beijing, they know that Skadden Arps is very developed, very sophisticated work. They know that there's requirements to bill a lot of hours there. They know that the attorneys working for, very highly qualified partners that are working for the biggest companies. And if you're an associate, you're working for them. They have no idea about any of that if you're trying to get a position at a, coming from in-house. So you're much better off trying to work in a law firm than in-house, even if it's a smaller law firm. How can I transition from a smaller firm to big law without losing career momentum? Okay, so how do you do that? Well, transitioning from a small law firm to a big law firm isn't going to lose career momentum. It's going to get you more sophisticated work. So the larger the law firm is, typically the larger companies that law firm will be working for, or the larger clients or clients that are paying more money. So the work is expected to be of higher quality. Big law firms typically they'll be reporting to in-house counsel. In-house counsel that is in big companies will typically have worked for major law firms, so they will understand the quality of work that's required. They will review the work that the big law firm is doing for them. So the work will have to be at a higher quality. And the larger clients expect better work. When you work for larger clients, also the quality of the work is expected to be better. So the arguments that are in litigation, how tight the language is, how well things are written, for example, in litigation. So big law firms have people from top law schools, they have people that are highly motivated, and so those people will typically do much better work. So you're better off going to a big law firm if you can. if you're trying to get experience as an associate. So trying to get experience as an associate means, you're getting exposed to the largest work possible, best work, and developing those habits before you work in a smaller law firm. So large law firms, the work you're getting there is better. If you're a partner, you develop a book of business, and then you are in a position where the clients will accept higher billing rates when you work to move to a larger law firm. How do you find those jobs? Well, you find those jobs by becoming an expert in a niche practice area that the law firms need. So that practice area could literally be trust in the states, or it could be some type of corporate law that there's not a lot of attorneys in your market doing, or there's some type of real estate law where your experience is something that's marketable to a large law firm. So you get a position in the smallest law firm you can. First, a mid-sized law firm. That law firm, if it's a boutique firm, would often have people from big law schools or the best law schools, and in or people that worked in the largest law firms that started a boutique firm or something like that. So you get experience in the best small law firm you can, or you get experience in a niche practice area where there's not a lot of people in your practice area. So if the big law firm is hiring people from your niche practice area, then they don't have a lot of people that they can find from big law firms. So sometimes there are big law firms in smaller markets. So for example, Perkins Coie has an office in Idaho. So I've seen people get hired there from smaller firms because there's not a lot of people in that practice area in that location that the person was doing. I think it was some sort of corporate. And I think I actually transitioned someone from in-house to that firm. But at the same time, that's one way to transition from small law firms to big law firms. You can do that. Other things you can do, you can relocate to other markets, you can get business, you can get niche experience, you can locate to smaller markets, but also transition from a small law firm to big law firms. Big law firms will often like to hire people from smaller law firms because they know that that person's going to be much higher, much more motivated many times, and be much less jaded than attorneys from big law firms. So they will hire those people because they figure that they'll actually work harder and so forth. So, that's basically how you do it. It's a great question. Let's see here. Oh, we got most, no, we don't. What are the pros and cons? This is a good question. So, what are the pros and cons of leaving big law for an in-house role? So the pros and cons are that they're going to be less work in an in-house role than if you transition from big law to in-house. So you won't have to work as hard. The other benefit is if you try and leave big law to an in-house counsel role, you get the chance to work for one client as opposed to many clients. If you transition to an in-house role, you'll often be the first point of contact for legal issues. So you will be getting the work instead of a partner, and you'll get to do often work with a higher level of responsibility than you might do in a law firm. You may have more career stability. So a lot of times an attorney with like 10 years of experience without business relocates because they know they'll lose their job in a big law firm without that experience, or they'll be so they will, move in-house because they will believe that they're going to have more career stability. Do you get more career stability when you relocate to in-house from a law firm? Sometimes you do. So sometimes you will relocate to a company where you're not going to lose your job and where people that move in-house have career stability. But it's very hard to have career stability moving in-house because people in-house companies will lay people off when the company slows down or the company has financial problems. So you're a cost center as opposed to a profit center. Law firms or companies will lay people off, or you'll lose your job when a new in-house counsel is hired and wants to bring in their own people. And the in-house counsel, the general counsel leaves, or they'll often bring in their own people and get rid of the legal department and hire their own people when a new CEO comes. In-house counsel, their job often is to bend the rules and to figure out ways for the company to make money while bending rules and looking at the cost benefit analysis of doing things and even getting in trouble by doing things that could be even interpreted as illegal or against bar ethics and things. So this is what companies do, and sometimes in-house counsel if you leave a big law firm, you may not be comfortable doing those sorts of things. Like even like fudging like securities documents and making things appear better than they are to generate money. So all these sorts of things in-house counsel does. So the benefits of leaving are often that you get to bend rules and you get to help people do things that you normally wouldn't in-house. And so that, is another thing. So, there's reasons for doing it and there's reasons for not. And but the reasons for doing it for people often do outweigh, the benefits or the for people will outweigh the risk. And if you're going to lose your job in a big firm and you can't get a job in another big firm in a big market, that's something people often do. Okay. What is the best place to look if you're a senior attorney with no book of business? I specialize in corporate tax, but I'm willing to expand. So the best thing to do is to look at smaller markets or to look at more firms. So if you do, if you're a senior attorney with no book of business and you're doing corporate tax, you have all sorts of opportunities to relocate to different markets that may not have that may where you may not be able to get a job otherwise. So let me just show you how that would work real quickly. So Canada and just how you can drastically increase your opportunities. So I will show this to you right now that I think is kind of interesting and can help you. So let me just do this. 1 second. Make sure I'm showing the right. Okay. So how do you do that? So let's look at like just this is an example of a candidate search. This is an example of firms that you could potentially work in if if you do corporate tax. So let me just do this tax. I'm sorry, I gotta add a candidate search. Make sure I can do this. Give me one second. I may not be able to. Candidate search. I'm just seeing if I can add candidates. Candidate search. New candidate. Add a candidate. Okay, so let me just see. John. Mr. John. This is a fake candidate. John. I'm just showing everyone how you can find more jobs. BCG. Sorry, I'm just like Harrison. Actually, you know what? I don't even need to do this. I'm giving 1 second. I'll just go into Harrison demo. I have a way to do this. This is actually kind of important. So I normally wouldn't spend time doing this, but I'm just going to do this for you. Okay, search. These are fake candidates. Okay, so let's take an example here. Catherine Sarah Gerdes. Okay, so let me just take a look at this. We'll do corporate tax. And this person says they're willing to relocate to other markets. Okay, it's not working. Just give me 1 second. Oh boy, this isn't working. Okay, well, I'll just do it this way, just as this corporate fund, whatever this is. So I'll view jobs right here, just as an example for this person based on experience. So this will just show you how many jobs there are for this particular person in their practice area. So this is saying this person's looking in these different markets in California, so they're in New York. So they're trying to do, whatever this corporate area is in New York. So there's these jobs, which is quite a few. And then if you look at jobs for this person or potential firms they could work in, these are recommended firms. I don't know why there's so few in these markets. Maybe this because it's an existing candidate. Give me 1 second here. So this is just another example of this person. I'm not going to look at this person. This person is assistant chief. They're doing all these types of criminal positions, which this is an example. So this isn't for corporate tax. This is just a random example of someone. So this is someone doing all this white collar stuff in these markets. So they'll look in Idaho, California. But if they were just looking in Alameda, so I'll take off these regions of interest. If they were just looking in Alameda, California, they would have only these positions to look at. So let's just show that. This same example would apply to corporate tax. So if they were looking only in Alameda, California, they would only have these positions. But if they were looking at all these other locations, like I showed you earlier, they would have had all those positions. If they're looking at firms that are just an example that are recommended, that are strong in that practice area in Alameda, they would only have those positions. But if they suddenly were looking at, just an example, all of California, at firms that are really strong in that practice area, they're going to receive this many positions. Let's see here. Actually, there's something wrong is wrong. I probably already put those in their account. But the example would be, let's just do another example. If they're looking at all of these areas, I probably put those in the person's account already. They're going to receive, well, just I don't know what's wrong here. Anyway, the point is that if someone's looking at a bunch of different markets, they're going to receive a lot more position, lot more, firms that they could apply to than they would receive in smaller markets. So I just looked at firms that were in this person's primary practice area and location, regions of interest. So I looked at all the markets that they're interested in, and there's 1,000 places that they could apply to, used under their practice area, which is, the corporate related work, that they could do. So, I mean, the criminal law related work, all the different types of criminal law. So there's 1,000 firms I could send them to if they look at all of these markets. Whereas if I was just looking in Alameda, I didn't find any, but but when I looked at all these practice areas, which are related in those different markets, like, I looked at Idaho, Montana, those sorts of things, they were able to find, quite a few places that they could apply to and, compared to the other markets. So, so that basically shows you that if someone's willing to look at other markets, they're always going to receive a lot more places they could apply to than if they were just looking at one single market. And it doesn't look like in Alameda, there were any, positions. So as a firm, so the idea of applying to firms that don't have positions is that those firms are going to be, have opportunities that you could apply to. So my point is that anyone, whoever they are, can get a job. You just have to look at other markets. Okay, what should I do if I feel burned out as an attorney but want to stay in law? Okay, so if you're burned out as an attorney, you could be burned out for different reasons. You could be burned out because you're at a large law firm that has too much work and you're just doing way too much work. So you would maybe could work in a smaller law firm where you're not going to have to work as hard, or a law firm, whatever, in a different market. Attorneys do not work 3,000 hours a year in smaller markets. I mean, hardly anybody does. They work much more reasonable hours. That's just how it works. Or smaller law firms, they often work much more reasonable hours. So you should work in a law firm that doesn't have such unreasonable hours. Sometimes people will go in-house because the hours are reasonable. Sometimes people work in the government because the hours are reasonable. Most government attorneys do not work crazy hours. You're not working for your hours in a law firm, and your hours in house are not things that make the law firm profitable. The in-house companies and government positions do not make an attorney profitable, so there's no reason for them to have to work crazy hours. So that those are some examples. Sometimes people will become teachers. Sometimes people will go into public interest. People will do all sorts of things when they go, in all sorts of practice settings, because they want to work, they don't want to work unreasonable hours. But what else should you do? Here's another thing that's important. If you're burned out, then maybe that work doesn't support your soul. So people that are attorneys should be enjoying what they do. They should get some satisfaction from it. They need to be people that are motivated by helping companies or individuals solve problems and get someplace that they wouldn't be without them. So if this stuff doesn't nurture your soul and you just feel you don't enjoy it, not because you're working too many hours, but just because everything about being an attorney doesn't nurture your soul, then you probably should not be continue practicing law. You need to do something that nurtures your soul and makes you happy and does something for you. And if you're not, then then that's not going to help you to any extent. Like, you need to do something else. And I'm sorry to say that. I mean, maybe teaching the law nurtures your soul, or maybe working for a public interest company nurtures your soul. But unless solving people's problems nurtures your soul, then you shouldn't do it. Sometimes people will become recruiters. They like helping individuals get jobs. That's another thing you can do. You can do all sorts of things and other careers that nurture your soul within the legal profession, as opposed to things that don't. So, what nurtures your soul? That's what you need to think of. Okay, how can I improve my chances of of landing a law firm job in a competitive market. The only way to improve your chances are to apply to a lot of places. And so most people will not apply to a lot of places. They will only apply to firms that have openings. You should be using Law Crossing to apply to jobs instead of Indeed or LinkedIn. Law Crossing has jobs that are not advertised. So they have jobs that are on law firm websites, and jobs on law firm websites and company websites are not advertised. So when you apply to those, positions in those firms, you're going to have a much better chance of getting a position than you would not doing that. So applying to law firm jobs, in-house jobs, government jobs, you should be doing that. That will help you as opposed to not applying to places that only have openings. So that will help you. You should be applying to every firm you could find in your practice area. So corporate law, corporate law firms or corporate firms that do corporate work in Los Angeles, California. This is an example in Los Angeles, California. So you do that. So you're in Los Angeles and having a hard time getting a job in corporate. This is a look at different size law firms. These are large law firms. It will show you all of, all the all the law firms. So it's showing you all the, different firms that do it. So it's just going to continue doing this. It's going to show you other multiple mentions, and then it's showing you all these law firms. But in addition to those, that it's showing you, there's all of these lists of different things. BCG has it, then, you go down here and there's all of these firms right here, these smaller firms, the law offices of Choi, Insight Legal. Most people aren't applying to all these firms. So you go and you look at the websites of these firms, and then you see that there's multiple pages on Google of all of these different places, where you can find corporate positions. I guarantee you that most people are not applying to the, Partnership Diffused Unemployment Defense. Most people are not going to be applying to, these are sponsored firms, but most people aren't going to be applying to the Nielsen law firm to find jobs. So you look at all these firms that have a corporate related practices, Google, and you find those. You look at all of these various lists and rankings on Google and you start applying to those. You look at everything you can possibly find. So, and that's how you're going to find positions. So, you don't apply just to openings, you apply to every possible place that does that type of work and you will get a job. Most people don't do this. And so, so that, is going to help you. So that's how you improve your odds of getting a position in a competitive environment. What are the most common mistakes that attorneys make in law firm interviews? So the first one would be that your resume just talks about a bunch of different practice areas and the ones you don't do, or you talk about different practice areas than the job that you don't want. So the most, the questions that people make, they management, manageable, let me just see, manageable, wanting the job long term, and then want the job. So here are the most biggest mistakes that attorneys make. So the first biggest mistake that people make, so want the job, is that they don't look manageable. Wanting the manageable, wanting the job, long term, manageable, wanting the job, do the job, do the job. There's actually more. Let me just give me one second. Manageable. There's one more. Manageable. Libraries. Okay, well, these are the manageable. Sorry, I'm not getting them right. So the first one is being manageable. So, can do the job, do the job. Okay, so the first one is can you do the job? So meaning can you do the job means the law firm's going to interview and they're going to expect that the person work a certain amount of hours. They're going to expect that the person they're interviewing, can do the job means working a certain amount of hours. They're going to expect that the person that they're interviewing can do the type of work that they have or will learn the type of work. So, if they're interviewing you to do something and they're saying we want someone that can go to trial and you talk about the fact that you're not comfortable doing that, then that's going to mean you can't do the job. Or if they say we need someone to work on the weekends, that's someone that can't do the job. or if they say they need someone to work in the office, that's someone that can't do the job. So you have to look and you have to be someone that can do the job and will do it in the way that the law firm wants you to do it. Do they want you to do work that normally would be assigned to paralegals, or they want you to do clerical related work on the work that you do that normally would be assigned to legal secretaries? So can you do the job? That's the most important thing. So anytime you say something that looks like you can't do the job that they think is important to doing the job, you will not get the job. And people go into interviews all the time and they say things that they won't do. They won't do litigation. They won't do they won't give the work to they won't do work they'll only do work that senior attorneys do. They won't do work that junior attorneys do, and maybe they're a senior level attorney and the firm wants them to do junior level work, or they want them to work a certain number of hours. They want them to work in the office. So those are all things about the person that can do the job. Being manageable means that, if people give you certain instructions, you're going to do it, you're going to be someone that is going to do things the way that the firm wants them to be done, and that you will be manageable and you will take instructions. If you are someone that doesn't take instructions, well, and that's not good. So if you were hiring a nanny to work for you, you would want that person to do things the way you wanted. You would want them to take instruction and not do the things that were against your instructions. So if you told them, I need you to feed my kids in a certain way or do whatever, I need you to, drive people to places, and then they said, I won't do that. I'll only, that's someone that's not manageable. That's someone that also can't do the job. So certain people are not manageable. They want to do everything on their own, or they think that they know what to do, or they don't like taking instruction. It makes them mad. They don't like, the way certain people that work for them want things done. They're not manageable. So people go into interviews, they talk about things where they do the job in the way they want. They talk about things that make them non-manageable, and so people won't hire them because of that. These are all very important, by the way. Other people that they're, interviewing may not want the job. So, if you have someone you're interviewing and for a job and they really want the job, you're going to like them a lot more than if someone doesn't want the job. So just think about that. Like, if you're, one of the things my mom, I don't know why, she just keeps giving me this example, but the example is when I was young and she took me to view these Brittany Spaniel puppies to select the puppy I wanted. And the puppy that I wanted was the runt of the litter. But the second I got to look at the puppies, this puppy ran up to me, was kissing me and like being all nice to me and everything. And that was a dog that really wanted me and wanted me as their master or whatever, that really, wanted to be my puppy compared to the other ones that were just kind of frolicking and playing with each other or just laying down nothing. So hired, picked the puppy that really wanted me. And so, people like people that like them. People like people that really want the job and like it, because someone that really wants the job is a better person to hire than someone that may not. Another example is a lot of times attorneys from smaller law firms that are trying to interview with larger law firms walk into the large law firm and they put on this performance and they tell them how much they really want the job. And then the law firm is much more likely to hire them. I had one example where I hired an in-house chief executive officer. And the person that I hired had the best qualifications, I thought. But they walked into the interview. They said that they needed to go outside and end early because they had a dog that was in their car and they needed to get back to it. But at the same time, that person had really good qualifications and I hired them. That person ended up being a horrible employee. They would come in late and all these things. I ended up hiring that person, or, when I should have hired the guy that came in that was older. He might have been in his late 60s. But after the interview, he stood in front of my desk and he said, if you hire me, I will really do a good job with this. This is an important thing to me. I really want this job. And he was very humble. And I didn't hire him. And the person that I did hire ended up suing me and I ended up firing. So I hired the wrong person. The person didn't want the job, and that was a problem. The next thing that people will look at when they're interviewing you is, do you look like you'll do the job long term? So, do you look like someone that's going to go there and commit? They will hire the person that comes into the interview and looks like that this position is the last position that they're going to take on the path to finding the right law firm. It could be a boutique and smaller law firm that matches whatever their long-term goals are. It could be a larger firm that matches their long-term goals. But if someone comes in and they look like they're going to stick around in this firm for the long term, and it's not something that the person's going to move to a different law firm in the future, they're going to actually want to stay there and for the rest of their career because whatever's in their background, however they communicate their interests to the firm and people there, that attorney looks like they're gonna stay. So those are all the things you need to do. So just remember being manageable, really wanting the job, someone that's going to look like they stay there for the long term, and someone that's going to do the work in the way that they want. Meaning you're not going to talk about wanting to work remotely if that's important. You're not going to talk about wanting to work remotely if you're manageable. You're not going to do the things that a law firm, that the law firm doesn't want. You do those things, you're going to get a job. This is a thing that I follow when I interview people, when I do interview prep. I prepare people for interviews. It's something that, I do every day. And this is what I cover. And when I do cover these things, the person goes between 1 and 2 times of potentially being able to get the job to 8 to 10 times or 4 out of 5. So learning these things can get you almost every job that you apply for because you will stick out as someone that's a much better candidate. Okay, so this person says I'm entering the firm as a entry-level candidate with a unique background. That's great. So that's good. Okay, let's see here. Okay, tomorrow I have an interview, and there may be some more questions other than this. In a very small town for a government position, the hiring manager seems very eager to hire immediately. What is your advice uh, on finding a place to stay? They're always away from on a very tight unemployed budget. Well, the thing I would recommend is if you want to work in a law firm, you need to apply to as many places as possible. If this is the only place that will hire you and you have, then that is where you should go to work. But most people, if they apply to enough firms and enough markets, can always get a law firm job. But finding a place to stay there away from and a very tight legal market in that market. Well, if it's a smaller market, then you can often move even from in-house to a law firm when you might not be able to do that in a larger market. So larger markets, it's very hard to move from a government position to a law firm position because the law firm will hire people that are already in law firm positions because they have a much larger universe of people to hire from that are in law firm positions as opposed to other practice settings. So they're always going to prefer to hire people from law firms. But if you're in a smaller market and you move there and you're working in some sort of legal capacity, your ability to get jobs is much better or much higher. Okay, let me get the next questions here. Give me 1 second. Okay, got that one. So just looking to make sure I have other questions. There are other questions. I want to make sure I get them. Okay. Wow, there's a lot of questions. So I'm good. Sorry, I'm trying to copy these questions. Oh, good. So I'm able to do this. Give me 1 second. Okay, so great. More questions. And again, if anybody has any other questions after these that I'm answering, whoops, let me see here. Okay, okay. So let me get these. Give me 1 second here. Let me see if I can get if I can't get these, I'll have to do another way of copying them again. If I can't get them, I'm gonna have to do it from the top again. Sorry, I'm doing the wrong one. Sorry, I'm trying to copy these questions. I may not be able to. If I can't, then I'll have to do this. No, give me 1 second. So I'm having a hard time here. I'm glad there's so many questions today. That's very helpful. Okay, well, I'm not able to copy these questions, which is unfortunate. Oh, maybe now you can. Okay, I was able to copy them. Maybe, no, I wasn't, was I? Oh, I was. Okay, for some reason it did this. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm making sure I'm copying the question. Okay, I was able to get them. Okay. So first question is that I didn't get to was how do you address moving from another market, but you're not licensed there and there's no reciprocity? Would a law firm in the new market hire you before you're bar? Yes. So you can, they will, if there's no reciprocity, you will get hired, you can get hired by firms in that market. Often it will have to be smaller firms in that market because the larger law firms aren't going to be interested in you because they have a lot of applicants already. But larger law firms that openings, if you apply to them and you look like a strong can in your practice area, they will often hire you. So you can definitely get jobs in other markets if there's no bar reciprocity. That's not a problem, but you have to apply to a lot of places, or you can research smaller law firms in your market and apply there. So anybody can get a market and a job in a smaller market, even if there's no reciprocity. You just need to apply to enough places. And if you do that, you are not going to have any problems getting a position, but you do need to apply to, more positions, in more firms. So you apply to firms that don't have openings, and then you also apply to firms that have openings. The way to research firms in a market that don't necessarily have openings is going to be able to, find a law firm that's going to have, law firm that has openings you can also apply to in smaller markets because those law firms may not, have those law firms may not have, may not get a lot of applications. Because this person says, I'm a legal scholar. What jobs can I look into? So legal scholars can look into, first of all, if you choose to be a legal scholar, the job of a scholar is not most often if you're a professor or you're working in college as a legal scholar, wherever you're working, those positions are not, law firm positions are not compatible with what a legal scholar does because legal scholars are theoretical. They're used to working on long articles and things, whereas someone that works in a law firm doesn't talk about things in a theoretical way. They will just, they'll be very direct, and the clients do not have the patience, or the work is not what a legal scholar does. So if you have that kind of experience and that's what you do, you have to do what I've recommended to everybody so far. You have to apply to a lot of places, mostly places that don't have openings, because that type of experience turns off law firms because it's just exactly the opposite of what they do. It's not. Law firms are direct, they're very tight writing. They don't examine theoretical problems. They are very just they're cut and dry and get right to the heart of an issue and do things in a different way. And they don't have the luxury of thinking about things in that sort of way. So you have to apply to a lot of law firms, ones that are not as likely to have people apply to them, or you investigate law firms and try to find people that have hired people that have been law professors in the past, or even have people working there that are law professors. And then your other option would be government jobs where there's a lot of positions potentially for government attorneys, so that may be, with regardless of the background and they don't get enough applications. Or you can also investigate appellate positions where you can write appellate briefs and so forth, which appellate is much more related to legal scholar type jobs because you're researching things and have the luxury of doing, things in much more detail. Okay, thank you, by the way, for everyone that's asked these questions. I'm a current law student from New York City and want to look at other less competitive markets closer to home. Would you recommend New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, or should I focus on even smaller markets? I'm open to the New England states. I'm a non-traditional student with a previous career in finance and a family, so I probably wouldn't be able to move across the country interested in corporate transactional real estate securities and trust and estates. Yeah, so transactional positions are going to be very difficult to get in major markets because There's a lot of people from major firms. We're trying to get jobs in smaller firms. The same thing with real estate, securities, and trust and estates, not as much. So trust and estates is a very good practice area to go into. There's not enough people doing it. You can learn about it. You can, get jobs in firms doing it that may hire you as a law student. Anybody that's in New York City wants to do corporate transaction, real estate, and secure trust and estates. There are, one second. Hi, I'll be by.
Sorry, Father, my device you really.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, 30 minutes?
30, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm in a hotel. I'm trying to clean the room. So you can always look at smaller markets. You can always look at solo practitioners doing, they would be doing, you have to have a real estate attorney to buy apartments and things in New York. You can always look at those people. And then you can work in other New England states. You can work in New Jersey. You can work on Long Island. You can do all those sorts of things. So there's always going to be positions for attorneys in New York at smaller firms. It's just going to be maybe a little more difficult than it would be in smaller markets. But if your family's there, may want to stay there, I understand. But you can always look at, smaller firms in your market. And that if you can't get a job in a large law firm because you're not doing well in a local law school or extremely well, or you're in a big firm, a big school, you can always get a job. What advice or how would you address at an interview this week and at an issue with my former employer who didn't pay any of the attorneys and may need to get work right away? Yeah, you can actually say that. That's a great reason for looking for a job. So, traditionally you're not supposed to say bad things in interviews, but if your employer is not paying you and they ask you why you're looking, that's an incredibly good reason to look for a job. You can tell people that there's nothing wrong with telling an interviewer that. And that may actually is something that would help you quite a bit. So that's a good question. Okay. Okay, we answered this question. Okay, let me make sure I got all the questions. I think I did, but let me make sure. Okay, good. Well, I think that's all the questions. Thank you everyone for being on the webinar today. I think this is an extremely important topic. Most of the people stayed on this. A lot of times people don't say the questions, but it looks like, except for a few of the almost 1,000 people that were here today, everyone stayed. So thank you. And then, but the reason I'm thanking you is because these sorts of webinars, this particular one can change your life and your career if you've learned about all this. So, you may have just changed the entire direction of your life. And so, being on these webinars, every topic that I cover, I believe is like this. So it's very smart being on this, and you're one of the substantial majority of all attorneys in the United States that take these sort of webinars and learn this sort of information. So it really does make a huge, difference in your life and your career by doing this. And so it's something, that really could, that learning this stuff is, you should feel very proud of yourself for watching these because you're taking time out of the day, whether it's with work or other things you need to do to watch these webinars. And so I do commend you. I wish this sort of information existed when I was an attorney. One other person asked a question that's kind of fun, and this is the last question I'll do because they just asked it. But someone says, I want to get rich as an attorney, what should I do? So you have two different options. You can work in a law firm and hope that you advance and become a partner and hopefully it's a big law firm where your odds of becoming a partner are maybe 3 to 5%. But what else can you do? You can become a personal injury attorney. Personal injury attorneys, the biggest skill there is marketing yourself, not necessarily the actual work. So you can get rich being a personal injury attorney, very rich, even if you don't have good qualifications. You didn't go to the best law school. You don't need to be especially smart in being an attorney to be a personal injury attorney because it's just about causation. If someone gets hit in a car by a car, that's not something you need to prove. It's provable just based on what happened. So you can become very rich being a personal injury attorney. The other thing that you can become rich doing is you can become rich doing trust and estates. You can become rich doing high volume immigration law. You can become very rich doing family law and starting your own practice. people that start their own practices can become very rich and even when they couldn't get jobs in law firms, people that do family law can become very rich. And there's a lot of work and it's not that difficult to prove. I mean, so there's all these things you can do to become rich as an attorney. You could go into what I do, recruiting and become good at it. You can you can do all these things that will get you very rich, that make use of your law degree and that other people don't think of. Sometimes people will start businesses that have nothing to do with being an attorney, like document review or legal secretary businesses, or, they'll start businesses where they're marketing contract attorneys. And there's all these things you can do with businesses. A lot of times attorneys will go into business that doesn't even have anything to do with practicing law. They'll open pizza parlors and things, and they'll be so much smarter than people that are doing that they're competing with. They'll do very well. People can go in-house and get stock options and things and become very rich. So anybody that wants to can become rich with a law degree, and you can too. There's all sorts of things that you can do as a law degree, whether it's consumer-facing practice areas like family law, whether it's working in-house, whether it's starting other businesses. I mean, there's so many different ways, and anyone that wants to can become very rich. So thank you everyone for being on the call. I will be back next week. And again, congratulations on watching this. It's could help you. I mean, just the one about being rich right now could make you rich or the relocate into the market. So very, very smart being on this, very smart asking the questions you did. And thank you again, everyone, and have a good week.